Well, folks, welcome to one more edition of Politics and Random. Egberto Willies, your host. Thank you so kindly for being a part of the show. We are going to have a great show for you today. Let's see what's up. Let's see what's up. Without having read the article, it says here, Michael Rudnin gave us a beginning. Biden to deploy FEMA at the border amid child migrant surge. We've been clamoring that President Joe Biden needs to send a lot more people and resources to deal with the crisis at the southern border. There's more kids coming in that can be vetted, processed, and sent to Health and Human Services, creating a backlog. These kids should be in custody no more than 3 days, but many of them have been there for a week. The longer these kids stay outside of these facilities, the worse their outcome. And that's saying a lot considering how this administration dealt with them. Follow-ups forthcoming. Good article. Other one, concern about Republican vaccine hesitancy is growing. Nearly half of Republican men, 49%, say they won't choose to be vaccinated if vaccine is available to them. We already knew large number of Republicans were super spreaders after they turned mask wearing into a culture war issue and continue to ignore public health experts' advice. But these numbers mean that nearly all of the rest of us must get our shots when they are offered if we want to achieve herd immunity through vaccination and finally end this pandemic. Yeah, we have a little piece from Psaki about that as well. The third stimulus check, here's what could delay or lower your payment. I'm worried about Democrats means testing, reducing a lot of people's checks down from 1,400, possibly losing their votes to anger. That's a very distinct possibility. Lastly, he says, Stacey Dash apologizes. Should we forgive? Yes. Anybody leaving the Trump train, keep the door open. I repeat, anybody leaving the Trump train, bite our pride, bite our need for revenge, bite it all. Bring them into the fold. It's like bringing in the prodigal son, the prodigal daughter. Let's bring them into the fold. The more people we bring in, the more we can then create policies that support all of us, including the misled Trump supporters. So the question is, do we forgive? Let's listen to what British MCP has to say. We can forgive, but not forget. We should never forget, and absolutely right, but forgive and say, come on into the fold. We are all with you. Yes, I say that. Welcome aboard, British MCP. Welcome aboard, Lee Grant. Hey, all. Welcome aboard, 777. Glad to hear Egberto call it a crisis. Even Biden won't do that. Kudos on finally being honest. It's no different than the crisis we've had before. Okay, this is a crisis we have on a yearly basis or every several years. And there are reasons for these crises, if you will, because of what's occurring in Central America, because of what we have done in Central South America and other places. But again, in America, we tend to just look at things superficially. We don't look at causality. If we looked at causality on so many things, it is amazing that we wouldn't have the disagreement among peoples that we have today. It's amazing that most conservatives and liberals would be living in peace because they would have seen the genesis of so many of the problems that occur in the country right now. One of the reasons that we have politics done right is to do just that. Let's try to get to the genesis of much. A lot of the crises in Central America didn't start today, didn't start 5 years ago, didn't start 10 years ago. We can bring in about Chiquita Banana affecting a whole lot of people. We can talk about the ripping off of bauxite in Jamaica. We can talk about a lot of issues that causes these migrations that we're talking about, that makes these people want to run to a place where they think they'll have an opportunity after their opportunity has been denied by the plutocrats in Central America, because many times America think it is easier to deal with one dictator than to deal with democracies overseas. We claim we want democracy in America and around the world, but we don't want democracy overseas many times. Easier to deal with one dictator. And even in America, we've started to notice that, wait a minute, it's so much easier if we just have a strong man. And we attempted that, and luckily for now, we've dispelled the idea of having a strong man in the United States of America. Okay, third stimulus checks being held up by Chase and Wells Fargo banks. I don't know what that means. Do you mean your stimulus? Okay, Daniel Ledo says, glad to hear. Oh, I read that already. Lee Grant says, Egberto, did you see the violent insurrection in Portland over the weekend? I don't know why you constantly try to create two different stories. If we want to have an honest discussion, we have to understand causality and we have to understand what was being done. inside in Washington, D.C., we had terrorists attack the house, our house, the main house of government, with the intent of overthrowing an election. They were in there looking for those boxes, to destroy the boxes and to get rid of the head of Congress, so that Trump would have had to declare a national emergency and remain in power after his Republican cohort in Georgia, Arizona, and Wisconsin prevented him from stealing the election. Republicans prevented a Republican president from stealing the election. Yes, we have very good Republicans out there. Okay, so, and it's not the same as Portland. Let's see, Eric Hayes, what is the cause? Tell us. I think I just explained a lot of the cause from Chiquita Banana. I can give you a lot of other reasons. Egberto, before with Trump, it was policy, position, child, family separation, punishing refugees by design. Now with Biden, it's a matter of insufficient personnel. That's a huge difference. Absolutely so. Right now, we're still dealing with the mishandling by Trump. You don't fix that in 50 days. You don't build structures in 50 days. Okay, Lee Grant, Biden's got a big crisis at the border. He should have quietly continued Trump's successful. Trump's policy wasn't successful. Trump's policy was evil. Hi, Eric Hayes, cause of what? Okay, let's see. Eric Hayes replying. What is he talking about? Oh, JP Morgan aren't giving their customer $1,400 stimulus check until March 17. Otherwise, banks have paid out already. Maybe that's what Bank of America said, because if you check, I think that's the date that many of these things have, March 17th. So that, I think, is done by the government. They put that hold on it. Not my stimulus. Anyone who banks with them, their checks are being held for no reason, not until 3/17. That is because that, again, if you take a look and go to the IRS site, they said that is the day that check is supposed to be coming there. Don't ask me why. I don't know. Pamela Matux, welcome aboard. Hello from Kentucky. Welcome, Pamela. Lee Grant, he needs to distract from Antifa violence. No, I don't. I don't need to distract from Antifa violence at all. Not at all. Okay, did I get everybody? Text 77, Lee Grant, Pamela Mattox, Eric Hayes, British MCP. Welcome aboard all. All right, let's get to the show. We got a long show, good show. I think you're going to enjoy this. Let's get busy. So what is the show going to be about hoy? Hoy means today. ¿De qué vamos a hablar hoy? What are we going to speak about today? Here we go. DNC member discusses the failed red states and keeping the House. Psaki disses Trump. Krugman versus Summers. DNC member Christopher Reeves gives his analysis on the failed red states and Democrats retaining the House. Also, Jen Psaki disses Donald Trump in a very interesting way, as well as Krugman versus Summers on the COVID relief bill, also known as American Rescue Plan. Okay, let's go ahead and get busy and have a little talk with Jen Psaki. Earlier, Dr. Fauci said that if Donald Trump entered the game about encouraging people to use the vaccines or get the vaccines, it would be a game changer. So, of course, a reporter asked Jen Psaki about that. And Jen Psaki, in her interesting way, pretty much dissed Donald Trump. I want you to see this, and then we'll take it on the other side.
Dr. Fauci said recently that former President Trump getting involved in this would be a game changer for encouraging Republicans to take the vaccine. Do you guys agree, and does President Biden want to see Trump get involved in this messaging?
Well, if former President Trump woke up tomorrow and wanted to be more vocal about the safety and efficacy of the campaign, of the vaccine, certainly we'd support that. But also, I think what's important to note is that, as I noted, 81% of Republicans said they would trust their own doctor or healthcare provider, and that's an important place to invest. Every other living former president, or most of them, if not all of them, has participated in public campaigns. They did not need an engraved invitation to do so. So he may decide he should do that. If so, great. But there are a lot of different ways to engage, to reach out, to ensure that people of a range of political support and backing know the vaccine is safe and effective.
Did you get the two disses? Number one, he's untrustworthy. He lies too much. Nobody trusts him. They trust their doctors. They're not going to listen to the president necessarily. 81% of Republicans said they will trust their doctors. And number two, well, the president had all the opportunities. All the other presidents, without queuing, they went out and said, we took the vaccine. We took the vaccine. The president took the vaccine as well, but he took it hiding. He didn't let anybody know he took the vaccine. So what you're saying is, look, if he wanted to be out there, he would be out there, but he's making the he has a selfish reason why he refuses to come out, even as he has had the vaccine. He's not encouraging his folks to go out there and get vaccinated. Two disses, one line. Two disses, one line. I love that. I love that. I love that. I love that. Anyhow, I want you to, right now, a lot of Republicans are giving hell about the American Rescue Plan. They want to say, oh, either it's inflationary or it gives away a whole lot of stuff or whatever. It gives people on unemployment gets more than if they were employed. Really? Is that really a problem? Well, the only problem I have so far is that some of the critiques now are coming from, well, one former Obama economist, a neoliberal called Larry Summers, decided to open his trap about that. Unfortunately, what he did is he showed his colors. I want you to see this, and then we'll take it on the other side. Larry Summers continues his attack on the American Rescue Plan. Now, look, Larry Summers worked for President Obama. He's a fairly liberal guy. Paul Krugman is a very progressive economist who challenged him. I want you to listen to this, and then after, I have an important commentary to make on what he's talking about.
We are back with Paul Krugman and Larry Summers talking about the $1.9 trillion relief bill that became law on Thursday. Larry, do you worry that the infrastructure bill will not happen because, in a sense, Biden has used up all his political capital for this one?
I think we've used up a lot of economic space and political space, but particularly economic space on this bill. It just defies belief. You can commit $2 trillion to a program that contains no public investment and not have less capacity for public investment than if you had not made a commitment of that magnitude. I just don't find it plausible. And I think we're taking very substantial risks. Would have been much better to have talked about large sums like this, but to have talked about things that would help us compete with the Chinese, that would talk about things that would help us prepare children for the 21st century, that would help us save the planet, rather than what we've done here, which is make transfer payments in virtually every direction. And yes, when we do that to the poorest people, that is exactly right. But some of the transfer payments we've made, I think, are quite misguided. For example, I believe strongly in unemployment insurance, but I do not believe in a program where the majority of unemployment insurance recipients are getting considerably more money than they got when they were working. I think full insurance is enough. Insurance past that point is too much. And that, in a way, is emblematic of why I'm concerned about what this program is going to do to the economy.
Paul, I wanted to ask you, there was an interesting column by Steve Pearlstein, the Washington Post economic columnist. I think it was his final column. I think he's a pretty straightforward liberal, but he said, I worry a lot about a new liberal orthodoxy that says deficits don't matter, debt doesn't matter, you can borrow as much as you want, spending always pays for itself. And I think he was suggesting it was a kind of mirror image of the kind of view that you've often criticized Republicans as having, the tax cuts always pay for themselves. I mean, can one just borrow unendingly? Are you not worried?
Is it possible to have a spending program that is too big? I mean, are the things that Larry is worried might happen as a result of this plan, are those things that can happen? Definitely. I'm okay with 1.9 trillion, but if someone had come along and said, let's do 4 trillion this year, then I would say, oh, that's inflationary. That's too far. But the really important thing, I think, if we're trying to think about this future, is that this is a short term. This is a crisis response. It is a rescue plan. It's very front loaded.
Now, let me get the technicalities out of the way first. Many economists were wrong over the deficit for several years, talking about these high deficits creating inflation. They forget one of the major tenets we all learn in Economics 101, and that is you cannot have inflation if you have more products chasing dollars. Okay, in other words, if you have a lot of product availability, if you have a lot of productivity, you cannot get inflation because you have enough product to sell. That's number one, product and services to sell. Number two is that he fails to take into account that many of the workers have been underpaid for decades. Now, one of the reasons sometimes I believe Larry Summers belong in a reconstructed Republican Party is based on what concerns him about the bill. He says that he doesn't like that unemployment insurance is being paid to people where unemployment insurance is actually paying them more than they received for a job. Well, the reality is we can't even get a minimum wage change that brings people up from poverty into the middle class because of people like Larry Summers and others. They don't want to quite carry the minimum wage as high as it needs to be, which is really over $20. In other words, minimum wage, if it had followed inflation, would be over $20 right now. But he's concerned that the bill is paying for worker insurance a living wage because they are making more than the starving, the poor person wage they were making before. No, what this should be is a wake-up call to industry that says, wow, maybe if the government continues to pay these people that sort of wage, they will start to think about which jobs they choose. In other words, empower the worker. In other words, give back to the worker much of what was taken to him over the last 40 years. Over the last 40 years, the worker has been pilfered. Over the last 40 years, the upper classes have stolen the wages of the worker. When that baker, when that owner of that store had to pay increased costs in electricity, they didn't say, we're going to keep the electricity price the same. They didn't say, we're going to keep the price of flour the same. They didn't say, we're going to keep the prices of shirts and clothes the same. They had to pay whatever the cost was. Why is it that the worker is the only one who has to be frozen in time? This bill, it's not inflationary because there's a whole lot of work to be done out there, and there's a whole lot of people who are there to build whatever these people who are working want to buy. The problem here is we need a paradigm shift. A paradigm shift that empower workers. A paradigm shift that says Jeff Bezos doesn't really own that $160 billion. That is our money. That is the money all those drivers, those packers, and all those people that are working out there for Amazon, that is the monies that were denied them by Jeff Bezos so that he could accumulate it because he had a so-called idea that many others had, but he patented. Let's get real. The reality is this bill could be the beginning of a paradigm shift if we don't allow people like Larry Summers to get involved and say, well, we don't need to pay workers the same kind of monies that they were making before they work or more money because somehow that is wrong. No, what is wrong is having all these years passed with workers not paid what they honestly deserved. You go and watch any street right now, and you see how hard people are working. Absolutely. Nobody is sitting on their laurels. Go out, get up in the morning. When I used to go down to KPFT, when the station was still, we were doing it live at the station, I would sometimes leave at 5 in the mornings when we have special shows at KPFT. And the freeways are filled up. You see everybody in every neighborhood going to work. Yet a lot of these folks would want you to believe that Americans are not hard workers. We work harder than most people in this world. Americans do work harder than most people in this world. Anyhow, John Cotter says, welcome aboard, John Cotter. They can hold the workers down because they have destroyed unions in the U.S. Absolutely so. Rodnan said, it's no wonder that people are clamoring for minimum wage increases. Far too many are working for starving wages. Absolutely so. As a moral standpoint, anyone who works full-time shouldn't be anywhere near a poverty line. Absolutely so. If you're a business person and you can't afford to pay somebody else so that they can live on what you're paying them for a full-time job, you ain't got a business. You've got a hobby. Remember that. Or you either have a hobby, or all that work, that additional work, can be done by you or somebody between you, your family. Well, not even your family, because you need to pay your family a living wage as well. Bridge MCP says, Ron Johnson says he may have been concerned had Capitol rioters be BLM. I wonder what does that mean. Maybe if their hue is a bit darker, it would be a problem. Okay, let's see what else is here. Bruce, peace to all. Welcome aboard. Bruce Paul Fleming, welcome, brother. We won't give Trump publicity on Operations Warp Speed, just like he didn't give Obama credit for the wave he was riding on the economy. But it's not only that. Warp Speed isn't something invented by Donald Trump. Okay, RNA technology, RNA messenger technology was paid for by guess who? All of us taxpayers. And it so happened it was just waiting for something to come along to fix. So Warp Speed wasn't a Donald Trump thing. Warp Speed was just, we got to do this. So, I mean, I want people, and I wish more politicians and more reporters would tell the truth. RNA technology didn't materialize in 2 months. After the Chinese decoded the virus, that decoding was sent to the researchers who have already been working with RNA technology and messenger RNA. And they just went ahead and programmed the messenger RNA for the spike in that particular virus. It's not anything that Donald Trump created. It's not anything that Donald Trump even legislated to be paid for. Donald Trump went ahead and said, okay, I guess we have a virus, we got to fix it. So no, zero support for Warp Speed and Donald Trump. And anybody not telling the truth about that, it is important that we tell the truth. Warp Speed is just a nomenclature. Warp Speed is just some fancy word, some narrative, some stuff that they want to advertise. Let's not fall for that crap. Messenger RNA has been around because, you know what? All of you brothers and sisters of mine, you paid for messenger RNA. Remember that. You paid for messenger RNA long time ago. So you paid all the research that went into that. It was just waiting for the problem to occur, for it to be used. Let's remember that. Okay, continuing. Now, what Biden did is what is created policy that works. That's why we have vaccinations in full vogue. That's why he forced competing companies using the WAR Act to work together. It took somebody to come in and take control of a situation instead of saying, if you're willing to pay me this, we'll give you that piece of the pie. If you're willing to pay it, we'll give you that piece of the pie. That is all that's changed. Okay, before I get along, John Carter says, the same people believe the nonsense that Reagan sold 40 years ago. Absolutely so. Grant says, Egberto is the Sergeant Schultz of the progressive movement. Antifa violence, I know nothing. BLM rats, I hear nothing. Brother Lee Grant, that cup of coffee that by the way, I'm completely vaccinated. I got my second vaccine. In 2 weeks, I can actually meet outside at any coffee shop with anybody with my mask on, assuming you're vaccinated as well. I'd love to have coffee with you and so that we can have an extensive discussion. Because you're a good guy, just a bit trastornado, Lee Grant. But I want to talk to you because you're one of the good ones. Let's see. Oh, man, I'm at already almost 3:30. I got one more video to show and then the product. So then the interview. So I'll tell you what, I'm going to do it real quick today. Folks, please, if you are on YouTube right now, please click the join button to support Politics Done Right. You click the join button, you join what we call the PDR Posse. And what's the PDR Posse? The PDR Posse is a group of us that decided to support this. And why do we support this, Politics Done Right? Because we're out there promoting the message, filling up all over the internet space, the airwaves, FM radio, with telling people the truth about progressive values. And by the way, who is the PDR Posse's favorite person right now? Bridge MCP, who designed the cup for the PDR Posse. And we have some new pictures for the PDR Posse. Here it goes. These are the people who bought the cup for the PDR passes so far. We have a lot of them, but these are the ones who sent me pictures. Roberto Luis de Panama, a friend of mine from Panama. He bought all the cups. There you go. Bridge MCP. Thank you so kindly, Bridge, for getting it as well. And then, of course, there's Linda E. Welcome, Linda E. Thank you for getting that cup, young lady. As well as Norman Reynolds for buying the cup. Hey, guys, if you want to go ahead and get that cup, I'm going to put that link in here right now. I forgot to bring up that screen. To get that cup, you can just go ahead and click on that link. And why would you want to get that cup? Because you're helping Politics Done Right. You're helping me. You're helping Politics Done Right do what we do. Now, if you don't see the join button on the screen, you can actually go to youtube.com. politicsdoneright.com/YouTube. politicsdoneright.com/YouTube, and join the PDR posse, the Politics Done Right posse. Help us keep the message going. Help us get the message out. Likewise, you can actually support us by becoming a Patreon. Patreon is spelled Patreon. Patreon. politicsdoneright.com/Patreon. You can also support us at politicsdoneright.com/PayPal. We love PayPal as well. We love everybody that is supporting us and everybody that's listening to us, everybody that is sharing us. We have to make a difference. Before I go, I want to show you a graphic that Hope sent to me, and this is important. I didn't show it the last time. If you want to see the difference in how people look at things, how we distribute things, the left-hand side shows you a $1.9 trillion Republican tax cut. Additional spending, zero for people. And notice most of the money went to people over $75,000. Most people went to businesses. Only 15% of the people under $75,000 received any money whatsoever. So what we have to realize, folks, is who we support, who it is that we support. Now, on the right side, you notice that most of the money goes to people who need it. That is the difference between who you elect. Depending on who you elect determines exactly how your money is going to be distributed. Show me your policy. I show you what you trust in. Again, folks, please support us. Now let's go to that third video before we go to the interview. I really think the news media, the mainstream news media, has been trying to change the paradigm somewhat. ABC, CBS, NBC, MSNBC, CNN. Not Fox, not ONN, not Newsmax, but the other. But I still find that they are not doing enough to push back against those who continue to misinform, those who continue to lie. In fact, George Stephanopoulos today did a fairly good job, but he allowed Senator John Barrasso to get away with too much. I want you to listen to this, and then we'll take it on the other side.
Let's start out with what Speaker Pelosi said about that COVID relief package. As you heard her say, she believes that more than 90% is going to go towards COVID relief, and expressed surprise, bemusement that Republicans couldn't go along with it.
Well, to call this COVID relief is really false advertising. Only 9% of the money actually goes to defeating the virus. Only 1% of the money goes for vaccines. This is a Nancy Pelosi payoff to the liberal left. This is something she's been working on a long time. So, today we see her taking a victory lap to what is now known as the most progressive bill in the history of the United States, according to the White House. And the price of it shows that.
I am happy that he called that bill a liberal wish list and all the bad things they say about that bill. You know why? Because when we itemize everything in that bill, the one thing that we see is that it helps people. The tax cut scam that they passed for $2.3 billion didn't. They didn't complain about that. But this one, which you can see it materially helping people, materially helping small businesses. Oh, it's a liberal wish list? All liberals, all progressives should say, yes, it is. It's that wish list that is helping people. It's that wish list that Americans all want.
We have 3 vaccines that are very effective. That's what President Biden has inherited, a recovering economy. So Republicans want to make sure people get shots in the arms, kids get back to school, people get back to work. But we are not going to stand with the Democrats as they try to exploit a crisis to send lots of money to big cities and to blue states and to really failed pension plans. This is not supposed to be a bailout. It's supposed to be about helping get the disease behind us.
What they're talking about is capitulation. When he speaks about all this money going to blue states, all this money going to pension plans, let's get it straight. The reality is all the states, these red states that these Republicans are coming from, they are states that take away every single year more money from the federal government than they put in. The economy is still on a slide, and it shows every single week when we see those new people applying for unemployment support. Donald Trump did not leave a growing economy. Donald Trump did not leave policy to mitigate the coronavirus epidemic. All these changes started to occur when we had leadership that decided to take on all these issues front and center, from making sure people had money, making sure people didn't go bankrupt, making sure people didn't get kicked out of their homes, all the way up to stimulating an economy that's going to look very different.
This coronavirus relief bill was not supposed to be about $1,400 checks to illegal immigrants or $1,400 checks to felons who are behind bars. Wasn't supposed to be about block grants to sanctuary cities or money to schools that continue to stay closed. Look, that's just the tip of the iceberg of the problems with this bill. The bill is going to come due for this. And ultimately, as you just heard Nancy Pelosi say today to you, taxes are going to be next on the Democrats' agenda.
All those things that he said, people in jail are going to get $1,400. Okay, what is the problem there again? Every citizen that makes under a certain amount gets $1,400. People in jail are citizens too. The other thing, as far as nobody's illegal, as far as undocumented people residing in the United States getting that stimulus, to get the stimulus, you would have had to file your IRS report. If you are paying taxes, you're getting back some of your money, period. They make these things look sinister, but they're not. They're just instruments to allow this economy to move forward, instruments to stimulate an economy that's needed.
Let's talk about the filibuster. There seems to be Democratic support coalescing around the idea of requiring the minority to do it the old-fashioned way, hold the floor by talking around the clock. What's wrong with that approach?
Well, there's nothing wrong with talking. The issue is how many votes does it take to get to moving forward with legislation? You know, this coronavirus bill was done by reconciliation, which allows for a majority of votes to win the day. You know, we have a 50-50 Senate. That's what the American people sent to Washington. With the vice president breaking the tie. You know, George, that ought to be a mandate to move to the middle. So we ought to do things that actually can get broad bipartisan support, like the infrastructure bill that came out of my committee last time. That's the best way to get things done. If you get things that are one vote and the vice president breaking a tie, harder for America to buy into that thing. The major pieces of legislation for our country historically have been done in a broad bipartisan way.
What they are talking about is capitulation. The reality is the 50 senators that are Democratic represent a whole lot more people than the 50 senators that are Republican. The Republican senators haven't represented a majority of voters since 1996. We have had Republican rule in the Senate for many of those years between 1996 and 2021, and they have not represented a majority of Americans since then. But it's worse. They've been able, with a minority, to blow up the filibuster to appoint three Supreme Court justices. So let's not talk about or listen to them speak about bipartisanship, because it doesn't really work and they themselves do not practice it. Let's get real.
To be clear, you have no problem with going back to the talking filibuster?
Well, I don't mind talking. I think that people ought to be able to stand and express their views. The question is it 50 votes or 51 or is it 60? And the current number is 60. But we've had this going on now for over a century. And the idea is to get bipartisan buy-in to bills. If there are parts that are very partisan, they ought to be left out. Focus on the areas on which we can agree. On most items, I think you can agree with 80% of the things. So let's leave out the 20%, which are the hot button issues, and move the country forward on issues on which we agree.
It is time for us to remember the people that continue to do well for this country, how the bills are written. You show me your bill, and I show you what you care for. And this is, Hope, one of our listeners sent me this. Take a look at that bill. What you see is when we had the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, in other words, the tax cut scam, only 16% of the money went to people that make less than 75,000. 54% went to people making over 75,000. Look at what we have today. Today we have 44% of that money going to individuals. We just the separation of the bill. We have 1.75 trillion of that 1.9 trillion dollars going to people, going to spending, going to doing things that help people. Most of the money, zero in the tax cut scam, was spent specifically for doing things for people. We have to remember these things. You have to remind Republicans when they come on TV and spew these lies and misinformation, we have to correct it so that the lie does not metastasize. A metastasizing lie is the reason we had January 6th, the unpatriotic, seditious insurrection that almost toppled the country. So let's not forget that. Let me go to questions real quick before I have to run and play the tape. Here we go. Eric Hayes wanted to know why is our Acevedo leaving? He's leaving because this is the last year for our current mayor, and those two have some sort of a good relationship. He doesn't know what comes after, and he wants to stay as chief, so he just goes to Miami, and he stays as chief. Let's see. Eric Hayes, it was not a growing economy. A growing stock market does not mean a growing economy. Like I explained in several months ago in these shows, the repo market was going crazy. Study what the repo market means. That is a market where banks borrow from each other. The interest rates between those banks had skyrocketed because of the fracture in the economy that we don't see on the outside, but the bankers who are running everybody's account know. And the government had to start liquidating. They had to start flooding the market with dollars into the banks. I'm not talking into our markets, into the repo market, not us, into the banks. So no, it was not a growing economy. It was a fallacy. Just like how many people think that, when Donald Trump went ahead and charged China tariffs, somehow China was paying. The suckers didn't really know that anytime you put a tariff on, we pay. Not the Chinese, we pay. It's amazing, it's amazing how misinformed the right has kept many of us. Welcome aboard, Roberto Lewis. Welcome aboard, everybody that I haven't called out yet. But I got to go to our tape. Then I'll come back, and we'll probably go over by 2 or 3 minutes today. But let's go ahead and go for our interview. Welcome to one more edition of Politics and Right. I'm Egberto Willis, your host. Today we have a special guest. As usual, Christopher Reeves, community organizer at Daily Coast and DNC committee man from Kansas. Look, when I hear the word Kansas, I always think about that book. You guys know what I'm talking about. And you know what? We're going to kind of discuss some of that as well. Welcome to Politics Done Right. Christopher Reeves, how are you doing today?
I am doing great, Egberto. Glad to be here.
Well, look, it's a pleasure having you. I think we've spoke a while back at Netroots a few years ago. We haven't had one in a long time. I don't know if we're going to have one this year or not. Do you know what's the rumor mill about this year's Netroots?
Well, I know everybody's trying to see what's possible, and there's one thing that is fantastic, and that is the way the Biden administration is rolling out the vaccine. So fingers crossed, it may actually be possible.
Do you know if it turns out to be possible, where would it be?
I don't know that. I have absolutely no idea of that. And I don't know if they would know. But I think right now it's probably more likely it's virtual. But I think that there's ground room for that to change. So we'll see.
I can't wait for us to get back together and get into all those rooms and those symposiums and those great panels that we have. Really miss that. But you wrote a piece, and when you wrote that piece, I kind of contacted you right away because it is right on point. We just got the American Rescue Plan passed, which is it's more than a rescue plan. It's a paradigm shift if we make a lot of its tenets permanent. And the reason I'm bringing that up is you wrote a piece at Daily Kos that titled "Kansas Republicans Spent a Decade Attacking Social Assistance. Now they are shocked at the result." And the interesting thing about this, Christopher, is that this is not only a Kansas story.
Yeah.
This is really a red state story. So why don't you tell us a little bit about the article, the genesis of the article? Let's really get into that.
So what had happened was, not only in Kansas, but in a lot of states, you were seeing a lot of difficulty dispersing funds for unemployment, access to health care. All of these things were really in a flux that the general populace didn't have a way to participate. And Republicans kept wringing their hands and going, "Oh, see, this is the federal government failure. This is, already Biden has failed." And I thought, most of this went on last year when Trump was in office. That's point number one. And point number two, what this really is it's the culmination of the last 6 years of stripping money out of these programs in these red states. So states like Kansas, Texas, Louisiana, Mississippi, all of these states, Missouri, have just gutted their internal process to handle everything from foster care to unemployment. And then when they were faced with a pandemic, they were not in any way prepared to make that happen. So even if they had some Democratic leadership, we're very fortunate here in Kansas to have a Democratic governor, the system was so gamed against the working class that it was really hard to suddenly get the help out there. It was a few years ago in Kansas, they passed all this legislation that went around the country because ALEC was behind it, that said, if you're on unemployment, you can't spend any unemployment money on steaks. And there was a debate as to whether or not minute steaks qualified or cube steaks or, what qualified, that they weren't allowed to use their WIC and all these public assets money on, which was ridiculous. You can't go and use your TANF funds on a luxury cruise, which nobody was doing, but let's pass legislation. And they also moved to limit how long you could receive it. And in the states that did that, they limited it all the way down to 10 to 13 weeks. Well, in a pandemic that lasts an entire year, that was not feasible. That was not something that could change. And so you ended up with Republican legislatures who weren't willing to budge, who were complaining about all the people in their districts that were struggling, but they were struggling because of legislation that those Republican legislators had shoved down the state's throats for the last 5 years, while all the rest of us were going, "Hey, this is a bad idea. In the long term, this is a bad idea." They didn't want to hear it now. Now they're experiencing what it is. And rather than own up to the fact that, well, we set this ball in motion, they're wanting to point the fingers at everyone else, because it's easier to point the fingers than to say, well, we should have done something about this when we had the opportunity. We just didn't want to.
Now, you have a special governor, or you had a special governor before we got this Democratic governor. His name was Brownback, and he faced a very tough competitor, a Democratic competitor before this last one. And we all thought the Democratic competitor was going to win because, as it turns out, your governor then, Brownback, decimated the school system. The teachers were against him. Many Republicans came out against him because if you want the prototypical supply side type governor, if you want the prototypical governor who believes in starving the government. He was the one. And when a comparison was made with just gutting the government by reducing taxes compared to a state like California who raised taxes to get their budget under control, we saw a huge contrast. Number one, how could he have survived? And number two, much of his privatization, as you mentioned in your article as well, went to grifting. So talk a little bit about that the Republicans in general, when they're talking about privatization, it's nothing more than grifting.
So Kansas in 2014, Brownback faced a really tough challenge by Paul Davis. And Paul Davis was a really good candidate. Kansas is normally a state that tilts Republican by default. So I know our current governor, Governor Kelly, is going to have a very tough race in 2022. But that having been said, there's a lot of things that go into that. One of the things that enabled people like Brownback is they never came out and talked about, here is the end result. They never once said, here's what's going to happen down the road. They only talked about, here's the immediate result. And so Brownback would say, hey, immediately you're going to get $50 back in your Kansas tax return, which is nothing.
Right.
But people said, well, that must be slimming down the government. So,
Christopher, as a member of the DNC, it turns out that the concern right now is that given what we've done in 2020, the Republican legislatures are a majority. How do you expect that to pan out with respect to how House districts are drawn and whether Democrats can retain control of the House?
So one of the issues that has happened is Republicans engage at the state house level in a lot of voter suppression. We always think about voter suppression as preventing people from going to the polls. But another level of voter suppression is drawing districts to either reduce effort, reduce turnout, and dilute the vote. So I want to kind of explain that. The first is to reduce effort and reduce turnout. If you draw maps to where a district is guaranteed, 100% guaranteed Democratic, because you've drawn it such that it's an all-black district or whatever, there's just never a challenge. And there are some districts in the country where there's no choice, but in a lot of places, they'll do that to pack all the Democrats in. What happens is turnout drops because people feel confident that they will have their state legislators and their U.S. House of Representatives. So turnout in that district comes down. Even though Republican turnout in that district is exactly what it should be, Democrats aren't turning out at the level because they know that they'll win. What does that mean? It means in statewide races, you get killed. The other thing that Republicans look to do is to dilute votes. If they can't pack it in tightly, then they'll move communities into a large array of other communities in order to make sure the Democrats are spread out thin enough that they can still win. And what this does is, of course, allows them to unbalance state houses as well as the U.S. House of Representatives by drawing district lines for both. The final thing that Republicans really do here that I don't think we talk enough about is that they put a lot of focus on winning the races at the state and county level. So once they have those in their hands, it's a lot easier to make just the raw machinery of how the election is going to work more convenient or less convenient for the people involved. So as one of the big examples that happened a few years ago was in Dodge City, Kansas, which is a primarily Hispanic community. The polling center was moved outside of town in a casino where a lot of people would have to drive, and the hours went in such that a lot of the people who worked in the meat processing plant would have difficulty getting there. That's a great way to make it difficult for some people to vote. Before that, they had put it right next to a country club in the white area of town, which made many feel uncomfortable to go there because they were afraid people would call the cops on them. In places like St. Louis and Atlanta and Miami, there have been stories about early polling places being put in things like police stations or nearby, so that people would feel uncomfortable. Am I going to get asked questions that I don't, I have people always think that it's going to be someone with a major crime, but a lot of times it's someone who says, "Oh my God, I've got parking tickets." I'm afraid to walk in there because they could throw something else on me. And those are all voter suppression tactics that come by gaining control of the state legislature and then the county level officers. So at the national level, I know we're really concerned about what do we do about these state legislatures? What do we do about more county officers? I think there's been a renewed focus on what do we actually start doing about district attorneys and state attorney generals, because we're thinking more about the fact that these are races that we haven't really pursued as hard as we should. But we're learning, as we see in New York, in Minnesota, that having a good attorney general can make a huge difference in the way people perceive the worthiness of the government that represents them. So
Now, I get all of that. Now, do you think that there is enough malfeasance that could occur to make it almost impossible for the Democrats to retain control?
Unfortunately, yes. I think if H.R. 1 does not pass, Republicans are prepared to gerrymander enough districts that they can dilute out some votes and they can make it very, very difficult to impossible for us to hold the U.S. House. That would be a real disservice to the American public. But it's one of the problems that we have right now is that we have too many Republican legislatures. And it's one of the real reasons why we need H.R. 1. H.R. 1 is not in any way about ending up with a Democratic House or a Democratic whatever. H.R. 1 is about saying, let's get people in both parties, Republicans and Democrats, in a bipartisan group who are not elected officials. Because remember this, elected officials will want to draw lines however they want to make sure they stay in office. That's
Right.
going to be one of their goals, whether they're Republicans or Democrats. But gets an independent group to look at the map and draw it just based on math, to make these maps fair. There are a lot of groups all over the country who submit maps. Let's do that. And then we'll take the results, and however it works out, we're prepared to campaign on those. But I think if you look at it like a Republican legislature is prepared to draw maps for the sole reason of making sure that they get the most Republican seats, or Democratic maps are drawn to do the same, well, neither of those are a good method to represent democracy.
Now, I'm going to circle back now to the American Rescue Plan. Don't you think we need to be selling the American Rescue Plan as not necessarily a Democratic plan, but an American plan in such a manner that we're not asking Republicans this cycle in 2022 not to be Republicans. We're asking them to vote their interests. And how do we get there? Because I am of the belief that we can get Republicans not necessarily to become Democrats, but to realize that, well, if we go ahead and elect this Republican House, the benefits that came with the child care and all these other issues are likely to go away. The benefits that go to the average person, which the average person more so is Republican when you talk about income levels, et cetera. Do you think that for once we can have an election where people will vote their interests, and we'll have Democrats in such a manner campaigning for the jugular as opposed to trying to triangulate not to offend some?
I think that's the most important part. Don't triangulate not to offend. we spend too much time not blowing our own horn about our successes. And I think one of the things is we need to point out this is not a Democratic plan. This is an American plan. This is the American rescue plan.
Right.
This isn't about bailing out banks. This isn't about bailing out big companies. This is about making sure you have a job, making sure you have childcare, making sure shots go in people's arms, making sure that schools have the proper ventilation systems and everything they need to reopen and be safer, to make sure your city government, your state government can still run and still hire employees. These are big things that almost everybody is agreed on. In fact, in polling, we're seeing polling results that tells us 80% of United States citizens, that's Republicans, Democrats, and independents, are in favor of this. So there is large bipartisan support of this nationwide, whereas all the Republicans in Washington, D.C. can be no votes. There are people at home who are waiting on a check to come to them because last year was destructive to them, and it was destructive because of Trump. I see too many people who say, well, we should give Trump credit for this, Trump credit for this.
No.
There are 560,000 people dead.
Dead. Yes.
That's the credit he deserves. Families that were torn apart. So the one thing that I think Democrats need to do is start saying, we are the party of justice. We are the party that understands that giving you that check was the least the government could do. I mean, the bare minimum we could do. And making sure that we help you get a vaccine, damn it, that's what the government is for. We've done this before with polio. You rise to big occasions. And whenever I hear Republicans go, well, we want to do this and that. No. This is where we as Democrats have to go out and start saying, we are for the American people. And fine, when you vote for Republicans, what Republicans are wanting to tell you is all of this is too bad. The taxes, all these breaks should go to companies. In fact, we've had one Republican governor and two senators say that, states should return this money because they can't give tax breaks with it. Well, BS. The average person doesn't need a tax break. They need a school bus to show up at their door where they know the bus driver has been vaccinated and is going to be safe. That's what they want. They don't need to know that Walmart got a tax break on buying a lot of property. That doesn't matter to them. They don't need to feel like their grocery store got a big tax break when their grocery store really wants people to come back to the store and shop freely. So that's how you get the economy going. The economy getting going isn't by tax breaks. To get the economy going, you have to get people feeling comfortable about getting back out there and doing things.
Exactly. Now, last question. I always ask this as my last question. What would you have liked me to ask you that I didn't?
I think the one question that nobody's talking about enough is what do Democrats do next and what constitutes success? Everyone looks at the first 100 days of a presidency as what can you get done. We've just crossed 50 days and Biden has got more done in those 50 days than Trump in 4 years.
Right.
But what I think happens next is we start talking about some of the things that Trump kept bringing up but never got around to. I think that there is a Democratic infrastructure plan coming. I know that there's opportunities for us to talk about real innovation and real commitment for what America of the future is going to look like. And I think we have to start getting rid of the idea of making America great again and start saying how great America is going to be and how we can make America great in the future. We're working towards that dream. That has to be what we're looking for, not looking back, looking forward. And I think that's the message that I hope we start selling.
Christopher Reeves, community organizer for Daily Coast and DNC committee person from Kansas. Thank you so kindly for having been on Politics Done Right.
Absolutely. Thank you, Egberto.
I hope you enjoyed that. We are out of time right now, but just before I forgot to plug my book, please, folks, go ahead and get It's Worth It, How to Talk to Your Right-Wing Relatives, Friends, and Neighbors. And I'm going to be talking to some of my right-wingers on this show now that I'm completely vaccinated. When they're vaccinated, we're going for some coffee, those of you that are local, or if I happen to visit your town. Anyhow, there is a link to get it at Amazon. That's the link. But if you want to support it at our store, along with getting our cups, getting all our other features, just go ahead and go to politicsdoneright.com/store, politicsdoneright.com/store. Alternatively, please join our PDR posse. That is politicsdoneright.com/YouTube, politicsdoneright.com/YouTube, or become a patron by going to politicsdoneright.com/patron. Patron is spelled Patreon. And lastly, but not least, we support PayPal as well, politicsdoneright.com/PayPal. Thank you so kindly for having been here with us. You know how I end this, baby. My name is Egberto Willies. This is Politics Done Right, and you know how I end this. I am what? Out! We spend a lot of time deconstructing the news, trying to parse it into a form that everybody can understand. We try to find those little nitpicks where it flies above the fray, etc. If you really like these videos that we do, I want to ask a big favor. Please go ahead, number one, subscribe to our channel, and number two, please join if you can. Thank you so kindly for watching. Keep watching. Please remember to share. We must populate the entire internet with our progressive message, a message that we know is what most Americans say that they want. So help us, please join.